been a while, but thanks for being patient. My name is Doug, and this is Heavy Metal Part 3 on the Full Earth Workshop. We proudly use parts and assemblies from model motor cars. As I've said before, we are too early old and too late smart. I have finally gotten a storage box to cover the entire model while I'm out there, so I don't have to do this every time. Dust every single part before we get to work. And this is exactly the reason why we should get a really good display case for a finished model because, well, dust and sunshine and wind and all kinds of particulates can wreak havoc on a really nice model. There actually is a brass Alfa Romeo nameplate that's included with the Pocher models, but I found this one made of white metal that I think makes a nice contrast with the brass radiator. In the last episode, we were working on the head unit of this engine, and we are going to put it into place today. Now, using this very thick cyanoacrylate, we're going to use it kind of like it's a gasket and place this head into its place of prominence. You know, this engine is a real pleasure to work on. It was designed by Vittorio Jano. It has this amazing cast supercharger that I just love. Well, let's take another look at the Firewall. This was all constructed from brass and aluminum, and that motor turning that you see there was simply done with a moto tool that had a little brush attachment on it. This motor turning is actually a lot easier to do than you would think. I simply put on a little grid using a marker, then followed the grid to put in each little element. The first couple of bolts went in very nicely. Now, these are a little more troublesome. Both have been stripped out. Well, luckily, there's a very good fix for stripped out bolts. Because this brass is so malleable and you have a brass screw and the brass threading, you're going to often lose some of that threading. All you got to do is take some copper wire, the kind you use for jewelry and you can get from many craft stores. Just place some of this very fine wire in the hole and suddenly that screw will just take hold. You cut it off, no one will ever know. So we finally have this Firewall mounted after working on it a couple of segments. Now let's jump into preparing the individual parts for a little bit of gloss coating. The reason we spray a gloss onto some of the parts is so they'll maintain a really nice shiny appearance for years. Now you got to be real careful when you go to apply a gloss finish to these because even the oil from your fingers can cause oxidizing after you've sprayed the clear coat. So you really have to be careful that you've wiped everything down on these parts before you spray. Now let's turn our attention to this frame, and this is where the control panel is mounted. There's been a little bit of breakage. You can see one of the arms has broken off. So we're going to have to fix this, but what you have to do, since this has already been sprayed with a gloss coat, you have to strip that off just in the area so it doesn't burn when you hit it with the torch. I'm using a lead-based solder because it really tends to stick to brass much better, and I highly recommend it. Just be careful not to breathe in the clouds of smoke while you do it. This whole support was built with square tubing and just bent around a mandrel to make sure that all the radiuses were equal. The original Pocher kit actually comes with a very nice exhaust pipe, but I wanted it to be able to match with the pipe that I made coming out of the engine, so I have bent it exactly the way the original was. This Alpha is actually an amalgam of several that I've seen, and this little support that I've built was seen on one of the prototypes. I liked it so much I made a copy of it. It fits in beautifully with the little screws here, and it's really nice to see this whole assembly back together. Model Motorcars makes a really beautiful stand-up tail light, as you can see in the picture. I have chosen to make my own out of some tubing here, and it's time to install it. Kind of interesting, when you're building one of these models from scratch, you end up putting it all together and then taking it all apart and spraying each one of the individual parts with gloss coat or whatever it needs to be, and then you have to put it back together again. And that's the stage that we're in right now. I'm having to spray some of these different parts, and the final assembly, that's when you really have to get things right. As you see right here, there is a particular way you got to put this thing together. The rear of the chassis is held together by this all-thread support. And the way that this light works, I've got to put that on first before tightening it down. Now I will need to put a lens on it. What I'm going to do for the lens, I'm just going to take some packaging material and cut from clear stock and then paint with a red tint. That'll come later on as we do some of the little fine details, such as wiring the entire chassis. Yep, I have the original wiring diagram, and we are going to make this look like you could put a key in the ignition and the whole thing will start up. I had a request from one of the fine brothers that has subscribed. He was asking what the size of this battery box is. So take a look real closely. You'll see all 3 dimensions here and have a great time building yours. Anytime you need a reference on building one of these Pocher models, whether it's the Alfa Romeo or whether it's the Mercedes-Benz, just check out the Model Motor Car site. They have a museum of people that have finished and people that are still building theirs after years. Great references to understand how these cars went together. Because the Alfa 8C was basically just a prototype car that several hundred versions were built, there are a lot of different locations for the battery. I have it on the side, but other versions have the battery underneath the seat. So just do a little bit of research and make a good decision for yours. Look closely, you'll see quite a few Model Motor Cars parts on this wiring loom. First of all, the wire itself, and also the brass parts on both ends. So this is going to be the area that all of the wires go into that connects back then to the firewall. We're going to be developing this over the next several episodes, so make sure you're with us. I certainly appreciate your support of the channel. If you can sign up and tell your friends about us, I would certainly appreciate it. We will see you next time for part 4 on the Full Earth Workshop.